US imposed new charges on goods imported from Canada, Mexico and China.
China has retaliated after Donald Trump imposed new tariffs on its exports, new levies on a range of American goods and products.
We turn now to another front in President Trump's trade war, and that's China.
Washington and Beijing have been locked in a trade war for years, but things just took a rather unexpected turn. China has just announced a sweeping ban on U.S. imports, and this isn't just another round of tariffs. This is something much bigger. For months, the U.S. has been raising tariffs on Chinese goods, and China has now hit back with its own economic weapons. Now it is very clear that the trade war isn't about taxes and restrictions anymore. It's about power, control, and who gets the upper hand in the global economy. What exactly did China ban? How is the U.S. responding? And most importantly, what does this mean for the world economy? Could this trade war spiral into something even worse? We're breaking it all down, from what led to this crisis to the potential fallout that no one saw coming. Stay tuned, because this is about to get intense.
After Trump imposed an additional 10% tariff on Chinese products, the president implementing those tariffs.
In February 2025, Beijing announced sweeping export bans on 3 key minerals: gallium, germanium, and antimony. These aren't just any materials, they're the backbone of modern technology, playing an important role in semiconductors, electronics, defense systems, and even renewable energy. And the country that relies on them the most is the United States, which, let's be honest, is about as convenient as realizing your phone is on 1%. And the only charger in the world is locked in your neighbor's house. With one swift decision, China tightened its grip on the world's tech supply chains, putting Washington in a tough spot. These minerals are essential for making advanced microchips, fiber optics, and even solar panels. Without them, industries that power everything from smartphones to electric vehicles are scrambling. And the timing couldn't be worse. America's semiconductor industry was already struggling with shortages, and now production delays and rising costs are all but guaranteed. But the real sting is antimony. This lesser-known metal is an important component in flame retardants, military equipment, and specialized alloys used by the U.S. defense sector. Cutting off access to it doesn't just slow down tech manufacturing, it creates a national security headache. It's like taking away a knight's armor right before battle. Sure, they can still fight, but it's going to be a really bad day. The Pentagon now has to figure out where to source these materials, and quickly. The options include finding new suppliers overseas, mining them domestically, which takes years, or recycling old tech to extract what's needed. None of these are quick fixes, and in the meantime, costs are climbing. China didn't completely slam the door on these exports. Instead, it rolled out strict licensing rules, making exporters jump through hoops before they can ship these minerals abroad. In other words, Beijing is still holding the faucet. It just gets to decide who gets a sip and who stays thirsty. And since China dominates the global refining market for these elements, anyone who needs them is now stuck waiting, while Beijing takes its time deciding who's worthy of a refill. The immediate fallout is the rising production costs for American companies, supply chain disruptions, and price hikes for everyday consumers. Electronics, electric vehicles, and even clean energy products are all going to get more expensive. Inflation, which Americans are already grappling with, just got another boost. In response, U.S. industries are now scrambling to secure alternative sources. The government is being forced to rethink its reliance on Chinese supply chains, rushing to invest in domestic mining, forge new trade partnerships, and figure out how to squeeze every last bit of these minerals from recycled electronics. But all of this takes time and a whole lot of money, 2 things in short supply as the trade war heats up. For China, this wasn't just about minerals. It was a power move, plain and simple. By hitting America right where it hurts, its tech and defense industries, Beijing made it clear. It has the power to disrupt key industries whenever it sees fit. Now, the U.S. is in a mad dash to free itself from this dependency, and the rest of the world is on the edge of their seats, waiting to see if it pulls it off. But wait, that's not all. On March 4th, 2025, China also announced new tariffs of up to 15% on key U.S. agricultural products, including chicken, pork, soy, and beef. But that wasn't all. China also tightened restrictions on U.S. businesses, making it even harder for American companies to operate there. This move was a direct response to President Donald Trump's decision to raise tariffs on all Chinese imports to 20%, a policy that officially kicked in earlier this month. Now, American farmers are caught in the crossfire. U.S. exports of chicken, wheat, corn, and cotton are facing an extra 15% tariff, while sorghum, soybeans, pork, beef, seafood, fruits, vegetables, and dairy products will see a 10% hike. If that sounds bad, it gets worse. China is a major buyer of U.S. farm goods, and these new barriers could deal a serious blow to American agriculture. That same week, Beijing blacklisted 10 more U.S. firms, banning them from doing business in the country. The companies, including aerospace and defense contractors like Huntington Ingalls Industries, S3 Aero Defense, and Cubic Corporation, now find themselves locked out of China's market, unable to export, import, or make new investments there. This follows last month's move to blacklist fashion, giant PVH Group, and biotech company Illumina. On top of that, China added 15 more American companies to its export control list, blocking them from receiving dual-use goods, the items that could have both civilian and military applications. Among the targeted firms were General Dynamics Land Systems and General Atomics Aeronautical Systems, both big names in the defense sector. According to China's Commerce Ministry, these companies posed a threat to national security, and their access to Chinese exports would be shut down immediately. The agricultural industry is taking a big hit, but it's not the first time. China has historically been one of the biggest buyers of American farm products, and even after Trump launched the first trade war during his first term, purchases eventually bounced back. In fact, U.S. farm exports to China hit record highs in 2021-22, with billions of dollars worth of soybeans, corn, beef, chicken, and cotton being shipped overseas. But in recent years, China has been reducing its reliance on the U.S., buying more soybeans from Brazil and Argentina, while sourcing other agricultural products from different regions. And just to make sure the message was clear, China's Commerce Ministry released a list of over 700 U.S. agricultural products now subject to higher tariffs, including chicken feet and wings. Yes, even chicken feet got caught up in the trade war. With China flexing its economic muscles and the U.S. refusing to back down, this trade war isn't cooling off anytime soon. If anything, it's getting more intense. And with American farmers and businesses caught in the middle, the question is, who will blink first? China didn't just wake up one morning and decide to hit the U.S. with bans, tariffs, and restrictions. To be fair, the U.S. made the first move.
And executive orders, 26 of them. Some signed at the rally with pens thrown to the crowd, others signed in the Oval Office.
By the very beginning of 2025, the U.S.-China trade war was already on fire. And at the center of it all was President Donald Trump, back for a second term, and making sure the world knew he wasn't backing down. If anyone thought his approach to China would soften when he came into office, they were in for a surprise. With sweeping tariffs, national security crackdowns, and a growing fentanyl crisis thrown into the mix, the U.S. immediately launched an economic offensive like never before. From the moment Trump returned to the White House, his administration made it clear China was in the crosshairs. The U.S. trade deficit with China had ballooned to nearly $350 billion by 2024, and Trump's economic advisors weren't shy about calling it a major threat to American jobs and industry. Manufacturing states that had been gutted by globalization were watching closely, and Trump knew it. Fixing trade imbalances wasn't just policy, it was politics. Then came February 1st, 2025. Trump signed Executive Order 14,195, slapping a fresh 10% tariff on all Chinese imports, set to take effect just 3 days later. The message was that the U.S. was done waiting for China to play fair. But this wasn't just about money. This was about power. The administration wanted to bring back domestic manufacturing, cut reliance on Chinese imports, and force Beijing into economic submission. But trade wasn't the only issue. For years, U.S. companies had accused China of forcing them to hand over valuable technology just to do business there. These weren't just empty complaints. Washington saw it as a direct attack on America's innovation. tech giants, military contractors, AI developers, China had been getting its hands on critical U.S. advancements for decades, and Trump wasn't about to let it continue. The new tariffs were a calculated move to make China rethink its approach to intellectual property theft. Beyond economics, national security was becoming an even bigger flashpoint. The U.S. government had grown increasingly wary of how much of its supply chain was dependent on Chinese manufacturing. From pharmaceuticals to electronics to rare earth minerals, America's reliance on Chinese production was now seen as a major vulnerability. A disruption, whether through war, trade disputes, or cyber attacks, could cripple entire industries. So Trump's strategy was about cutting ties before those ties became a noose. And then there was fentanyl. The opioid crisis had already devastated American communities for years, but by 2025, things had reached a breaking point. The synthetic drug, 50 times stronger than heroin, was flooding the U.S., and authorities traced much of it back to China. Chinese labs produced the precursor chemicals that Mexican cartels then turned into fentanyl, smuggled across the U.S. border. Washington had repeatedly pressured Beijing to crack down on the supply chain, but to Trump, China wasn't doing nearly enough. That's why, in early March, he took things even further. The initial 10% tariff wasn't enough, so he pushed it up to 20%, effective March 10th. His reasoning was that if China wasn't going to help stop the fentanyl crisis, they were going to pay the price, literally. The U.S. had used economic pressure before, but never this aggressively. Of course, Trump's base loved it. The rhetoric of fighting China, restoring American jobs, and getting tough on national security played well in manufacturing states and conservative strongholds. Supporters saw it as long overdue justice for decades of bad trade deals and economic decline. But outside of Trump's political circles, economists and trade experts weren't so optimistic. Critics warned that these tariffs could trigger inflation, raising prices for everyday Americans. Higher import costs meant businesses would either pass expenses on to consumers or cut jobs to stay afloat. Some argued that taxing Chinese goods wasn't fixing trade imbalances. It was just making life more expensive. Others worried that U.S. farmers and manufacturers who relied on exports to China could end up paying the real price if Beijing retaliated. Still, the administration didn't waver. To them, this was about long-term security and economic independence. Yes, there would be short-term pain, but Trump believed the U.S. had been dependent on China for too long.
We're going to have drops and markets are going to go up and they're going to go down.
Yeah.
But you know what? We have to rebuild our country.
His goal was clear: force companies to invest in American factories, strengthen domestic supply chains, and weaken China's grip on key industries. The battle lines were drawn. On one side, the U.S., trying to reclaim its industrial dominance while tackling national security threats. On the other, China, refusing to back down and preparing its own countermeasures. And as tensions escalated, the real question was no longer who would win the trade war. It was whether this economic battle was on the verge of turning into something far more dangerous. And recently, it seems that's exactly what has happened. China has now made its stance crystal clear. It's willing to go to war if pushed too far. On March 5th, China's foreign ministry took to social media and tweeted that if the U.S. was looking for a tariff war, a trade war, or even something more serious, Beijing was fully prepared to stand its ground. The message came in response to Trump's aggressive policies, which Beijing sees as a direct attack on its sovereignty and economic stability. And now, what started as a trade dispute has turned into something much more dangerous. Officials in Beijing have called recent U.S. actions hostile and warned that China will not sit back while its national interests are threatened. With China openly declaring its readiness for conflict, the world is now left wondering, is this how wars between superpowers begin? History tells us that many great conflicts started with economic disputes. What begins with tariffs and sanctions can spiral into military confrontations. And with both the US and China being nuclear-armed giants, any clash between them wouldn't stay contained for long. Allies would be pulled in, regional skirmishes could turn into full-scale battles, and the world could find itself in an unthinkable crisis. Experts across the globe are sounding the alarm, warning that this rhetoric is leading both nations down a dangerous path. Many are urging immediate diplomatic talks, stressing that one wrong move, one miscalculation, could spark a conflict neither side truly wants. A war between these two superpowers wouldn't just shake the world, it would devastate it. The global economy would be thrown into chaos, international relations would fracture, and countless lives would be put at risk. The biggest question now is whether cooler heads will prevail before it's too late. Leaders on both sides must decide whether they want to keep pushing forward with threats and retaliation, or step back before they reach the point of no return. Because if this path continues unchecked, the outcome won't be a victory for anyone. It'll be a catastrophe for everyone.